So welcome everyone. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem.
We're going to continue with the sacrifices that we started last week. We saw two shitot, two methods of understanding the sacrifices. We saw the Rambam, and he said, you can't cause people to go away from something they're so used to. And so God made a concession and allowed them to have sacrifices. Basically, that's what he's saying. So we read through that, and they were so accustomed to it. And then I asked, and then we saw another interpretation from so all these things, the whole idea of temple and altars and sacrifices and the incense, all of that, in the Rambam's understanding, is really just b'di'evid. It's something that he had to give them to wean them away from either human sacrifices, Natalie suggested, or maybe sacrificing to foreign gods. And then the Ramban, Nachmanides, argued with him, and he said there's real significance. And we read through that. And then we asked the Nechama style question: what is the difference between the two? And today I want to ask another Nechama style, or the same Nechama style question, but focus on a different angle. So we said that Maimonides, it's really just a preventative measure. There's no inherent value. Whereas, according to Nachmanides, there is inherent value. So where would there also be an interesting difference between the two? In what angle of the sacrifices can you think of? And this happened because if you subscribe to the WhatsApp group that Niv and I sometimes we send out every day. So I mentioned last week that Para Aduma, the red heifer, that's never going to happen again. But what's the idea behind it? And a rabbi from Chabad took issue with that. He said, "What do you mean it's never going to happen again?" And I said, "Well, I'm basing my understanding of this on a certain big rabbi." And then we got into this whole discussion. And this rabbi actually, here would be the difference between Rambam and Ramban. And the difference between them would be if one of them says there's inherent value and the other says no, it was just because everybody was doing it. How does that bode for future sacrifices? What do you think?
So Ramban wants us to do it in the future.
Exactly. And the Rambam, Maimonides, would say we don't need it anymore. If the whole world is weaned away from it, then we don't need to wean the Israelites away from it. Then there's no need for it in the future. And indeed, this rabbi, does anybody recognize him?
It was a Hasidic rabbi, yeah. I don't know which one.
One of the first chief, actually the first chief rabbi of British Mandate Palestine.
Oh,
Cook. Yes, Rabbi Cook. And so I was in contact. So I wanted to answer the Chabad rabbi who, was a little bit, I don't know if upset, but was arguing with me about this idea that what will happen in the future. And I turned to an expert on Rabbi Cook's writings because I learned in the yeshiva, I remember learning about this idea that Rabbi Cook said the future temple will only be vegetarian.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, but I'm not an expert on Rabbi Cook. So I turned to Professor Yuda Mirsky. He wrote a whole biography about Rabbi Cook. And I said, can you point to chapter and verse where he actually says that? Because the Chabad rabbi that I was in contact with, he wanted that chapter and verse. He said, no, I can't believe Rabbi Cook would say that. And so he sent me an article. So it's actually a very long article. And like many things with Rabbi Cook, there's a little bit of obfuscation involved. He didn't want to totally, he wanted to have it both ways, so to speak. You'll see the title of the article. Here's what he sent me. Korbanot Latid Lavo B'Mishnat Haraya Cook. So the abbreviation of Rabbi Cook is Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen. That's the Reish Aleph Yud Hey. And you see a whole article, and there are quotes. There's chapter and verse where he says it's only going to be vegetarian, only plants. But then there's other quotes where he says, but to talk about it now when people are still killing people, it's not the right time. We have to first focus on humanity getting to the level where they don't kill people. And unfortunately, today we know there's a lot of killing going on in the world, killing of innocent human beings. And so to start focusing on, well, let's have mercy on the animals before we have mercy on human beings, there's something twisted about that. There's something perverse. Let's focus first on saving human lives. So that's kind of the other side of Rabbi Kook, where he doesn't completely bash the idea of animal sacrifices. But he does say, and so it's a long article, and it's also not easy to read it the way he said. He actually went and photocopied from a book. So I need to get that book and read this whole thing. But here, the last paragraph I saw, for example, Ba'olam hahu yihiyu hamitzvot v'korbanot betilin. In that world, in the world to come, in the future world, in the third temple world, Mashiach times, the korbanot will be batal. Batal means canceled, right? We do bitul chametz when we do the we cancel the ownership of the chametz. אך בזמן הזה, שעוד לא הגענו לעת המאושרת הזאת, חיונית היא עבודת הקורבנות. But now, today, we haven't reached that time, that happy time, then it is essential to have this avodat korbanot. So he's kind of hedging his bets here. I would say he doesn't want to antagonize the real Orthodox world, for them to say there will never be korbanot, that's almost like heresy. So that's how I see it, that he's trying to be in both worlds, but he's definitely pointing us into the direction of the Rambam. In other words, the Rambam would definitely fit into this idea that in the future, if and when there will be a temple, it will be only with plants. We don't need that anymore. So at least I have a great rabbi to rely on, that he's the first to espouse this idea. So now let's talk about the different korbanot. They weren't all the same.
But
And-
what Shammai, but you know what, it seems like what Rabbi Kook is saying is, which is already said in the Torah, that sacrifice of animals, whether you're eating it or you're taking it to the temple, is second best. It's not the highest, what God wants as your highest thing, because doesn't it tell you in the Torah, when God says you're going to eat of all of these plants, but then he lets us eat meat after the flood.
Yes, great point. And that's the point that Rabbi Kook makes. You're actually saying exactly what he's discussing in his article. He calls it Chazon HaTzimchonut VaShalom, the vision of vegetarianism and peace. And he makes a point that, yes, we see that transition. First, there was no permission to eat meat. It was forbidden. Then Noach got permission. So he says that shows us the ideal. And he ties it into this idea of there won't be animal sacrifices. Yes, so he absolutely ties the two together. You would think, because otherwise it would be almost hypocritical that you want everybody to be vegetarian. That's the ideal, as you say. That's clearly evident from the scripture, where God permits Noach, after the whole world was corrupt. So God is saying, okay, maybe you need to eat meat because you can't. At least with that, I'll right. And then to say God would want us to kill all these animals, but not to eat meat. So so I think that the two are tied together. And Rabbi Kook, makes that point. Okay,
I think there's something else here, and that is I did read in a fully digested form of some of Rav Kook's teaching that he said, and he might have gotten it from the Zohar, I don't know, that animals in the future will be much more intelligent. So it'd be terrible to kill them.
Oh,
eat
yes,
them,
yes, I read that in the, yes, I've read that quote. Yeah, he does say that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a beautiful.
They go together.
Right, it goes together. So there'll be what's the word? Sentient, I think.
Sentient.
Sentient, yes. And so it would be almost like killing a human being. Yes, he does. He does say that in this future world, in this utopian world. Okay, so then now I want to go. We talked about Noach, and then we talked about three basic types. So they're not all the same. We tend to talk about sacrifices, we think, oh, they're just killing all animals and it's all the same. No, there's different types with different laws. So there's olah, there's where it completely burns. All the meat is consumed by the fire, Nobody gets to eat, neither the owner nor the kohanim. Then we have shlamim, that's where the meat is shared. So this is the most palatable out of the three, because people get to eat from it, and not only the kohanim, but the person who brought it. And then we have the final one, chatat, that's the red, that's the sin offering, and only the kohanim can eat. It's eaten exclusively by the kohanim. The person who brings it, he must bring it because he committed a sin. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to now let him have a big, feast and invite friends and have a whole, cookout when he brings this offering following a sin, and the Torah delineates, which ones you have to bring a sin for. So it does make a lot of sense that this is only eaten by the kohanim. So what is the energy behind each one of these types of offerings? So first, Rabbi Foreman discusses chatat. Who was the first person to make a chet, to commit a sin?
Eve.
Right. And so in the Garden of Eden. And so that he wants to extrapolate from that and learn from that what is the essence of this korban chatat. If we understand the first chet, then we can learn from that. So let's bring in Rabbi Foreman, and we'll stop each time and talk about it. So it won't be too monotonous.
So what I'd like to do with you is examine these offerings in terms of a few different criteria. First of all, what are the laws of the offerings? Who partakes of the offering? 2, what are the names of the offering? What do we make of the names themselves? And C, where are the precedents for the offering? When is the earliest times that we have an example of this kind of offering? So let's start with chatat. Think back to the very first sin. That was the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it's kind of interesting if you think about that sin, is that sin actually involved sort of illegal consumption on the part of people. We ate something we weren't supposed to eat, and then in this chatat we actually give back something to be eaten by Kohanim, who are sort of representing the divine here. As a matter of fact, if you go back to some of our Parsha videos, they even talk about the Mishkan as a kind of human recreation of the garden. The comparison becomes even more striking. When we were in God's garden the first time, we transgressed and we ate this stuff, and now here we are and we're giving food to be eaten, essentially, back to representatives of God in this new garden, in this Mishkan. There seems to be a kind of tit for tat here. Think about what a transgression is. You can think about that word, to transgress. The English word trans means to cross over a line. It kind of suggests that involved in any transgression is a kind of line crossing, a kind of boundary crossing. When we think of the world, almost a map of the world, boundaries are part of the way we think about it. Sometimes those are natural boundaries, but often they're political boundaries. If we would only imagine that you and me were in the world, we would imagine that part of the world is going to be my domain and part of the world is going to be your domain. We draw a line separating our domains. But now let me ask you a kind of funny question. Thinking about us and thinking about God, would you say there's anything in the world that's sort of God's domain? And would you say there's anything that's our domain?
Okay, so what was God's domain in the Garden of Eden?
The tree of life, tree of, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So he'll
So
talk
going
about
back to
that.
the garden, there's sort of a very simple answer to that. God created us and he put us in this garden and he said, here's your domain. Mikol etz hagana chol tochel. Here's all these trees, and from all the trees of the garden you shall surely eat. U'meitz hadas tov v'ra, but there's one tree, the tree of good and evil, that I don't want you to eat from. That's my domain. That's my tree. Of course, the very first transgression was the transgression, the crossing over of that boundary. When we cross over a boundary improperly, so we've sort of violated that boundary. A violation of a boundary would say is a lack of respect of the territorial integrity of someone else. I ask for a certain kind of basic respect, which is that you leave my things alone. We ask for that in our human relations. And in relationships between us and God, it's no different. The least God can ask from us, really, is respect. Here's my tree, please don't eat my tree. To go eat from God's tree is a lack of respect. It's a transgression. And the way we atone for it is when we inadvertently transgress in that kind of way. So we say, look, the least I think I can do is to give you something from my domain and offer that to the Kohanim. So the Kohanim consume the chatat, the sin offering. Now, going back to the very first transgression, there's only one thing that's off limits. The Torah, later on, as the Torah develops, puts other things off limits. But in all of those other things, there's a little piece of the garden. There's a little piece of the forbidden fruit. There's a little piece of God saying, hey, this is my domain. I need you to stay away from this. If we transgress those commands, so we failed, if you would have to categorize it, in the area of respect. So respect is one of the great things that make the relationship between human beings and God work, but it's not the only thing. Life isn't just a...
Okay, so let's summarize what he said and write it in our chart. So Hatat is transgression. It's lack of respect for God's domain. And therefore, we have to reciprocate by giving him something from our domain. So that's the idea behind Hatat. So respect is the key word, I think, that he's going to focus on. And that's the energy of this Korban. We failed in respect. By the way, it's only inadvertent. You only bring Hatat for inadvertent sins. You can't, if you murder or do anything on purpose, then you go to court and you get punished by court. But this is inadvertent sins, and so you showed lack of respect to God's domain. You crossed over, and so now God wants us to reciprocate by giving from our domain to God, and so that's the idea of they bring the sacrifice to the temple, and the Kohanim, God's, so to speak, representatives, they now get to eat from that, and only they get to eat from that. Now, we're going to see that Shlamim have a very different energy to them. And Shlamim, remember, you bring okay, he'll talk about it. He'll talk about it. So let's talk about Shlamim now.
About respecting God. There's another thing we can strive for too, and that's where the Shlamim comes in. The Torah in Vayikra calls a Shlamim a Zevach Shlamim. So if we take those two words, Zevach and Shlamim, where's the first times that we see them? So we see a Shlamim actually first in the Brit, in the covenant that takes place between God and Israel at Sinai. The people offered Shlamim as part of that covenant. If you go back to the very first Zevach, there was also a covenant. It was the covenant made by Yaakov and Lavan. It was sort of a treaty between them, as was Sinai.
Okay, I have issue with that. I think the first Zevach was not Jacob and Laban. I showed you last time. Who erected the first Mizbeach? Who made the first altar?
Is that Noah? Noah?
Yeah. Noach, let's read the verse again. Vayiven Noach Mizbeach Ladonai. Mizbeach, that's the root of Zevach. See, in Hebrew, it's beautiful because in English, there's no connection between the words altar, sacrifice, victim, slaughter. In Hebrew, it's all the same root. Zayin bet chet. So Lizboach is to slaughter, to sacrifice, and Mizbeach, that's a mem that creates nouns, like the word mikdash. What is mikdash? It's the root kadosh, kuf daled shin, and you add a mem that creates nouns. Mikdash, that's a beit mikdash. It's really the root of holiness, kadosh. Same thing here. So I think if you want to answer the question, who was the first to do a zevach, I think you have to go back to Noah. But I think it's still going to fit his pattern, because what happened here when Noah created this altar, built this altar, brought the offerings from all the pure animals, then God, so to speak, smelled the offerings, and he said, I am not going to never again will I doom earth because of humankind. And what did God then create as a covenant? If you remember from that story?
Rainbow.
Yes. So it fits what he's going to say. He says that the idea of shlamim is covenant. So I think he could have gone back to Noah and shown here as a covenant of peace between God and mankind. Okay, so let's continue with Rabbi Foreman.
Now think about the word shlamim. It comes from the word shalem, which either means peace or it means wholeness. There is a kind of wholeness that comes about through a covenant. When I reach out to you and you reach back to me, there is a kind of wholeness that is created there. Any transaction creates that kind of wholeness. At the lowest level, these are business transactions, but the highest level, these are really transactions of love. There's a marriage covenant, and in that covenant, I try to give to you freely, and I hope that you'll give back to me freely. When we make covenants, we sit down and we feast. We celebrate the kind of wholeness that comes with the covenant. That's what we celebrate in a marriage feast. So we celebrate in a treaty. Maybe that's a shlamim. And a shlamim is about different energy than respect. It's ultimately about the energy of love, the energy of building a covenant with God. So if we go back to that idea of boundaries, and we say there's part of the world that God has given to people, and then there's part of the world that, so to speak, God reserves for himself, that tree of knowledge paradigm, you might say that a shlamim is basically, well, let's share. Maybe I could give something from my boundaries to you, God, and I would hope that you would give something back to me. And indeed, that sharing is actually manifest within the shlamim itself in terms of how it's consumed. How is it consumed? It's shared. Part of it is consumed by the owners of the korban, and part of it is consumed by the kohanim, and part of it is burnt on the altar. It's shared among all parties. It's what a treaty is about. It's what a covenant is about. It's about sharing. But then there's one last kind of...
Okay, so let's summarize that. So the idea of shlamim was of love and sharing. So it's God's love and sharing the sacrifice. And also you have to there's a rule how long you can eat the meat. You have to consume it by either 1 day or 2 days in the night. So, and that causes you to bring other people to eat with you. So you're spreading the love, so to speak. And so that's the idea behind the shlamim. So it's very different than chatat. But then the most difficult one to explain is olah. Why burn the whole animal and not even eat from it, and not let anybody eat from it? So let's bring back Rabbi Forbert to try to explain the idea of olah.
Korban. And it represents the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It doesn't come because we've failed in some sort of respect to God, sort of our baseline obligation to God. It's not even about building a bridge of love with God. That's the shlamim. It's about something else. It's about awe, really a step higher in a way, even than love, at least when it comes to our relationship with God. Olah is about giving everything back. The olah is entirely consumed on the altar. The very first olah of the Torah is when God said to Abraham, "Give me your son, your only son, the one that you love, the one special thing that you have." You see how it's the inverse of the tree of knowledge? If the tree of knowledge is us sort of illegally and inappropriately taking God's one special thing from his domain, the olah is when we voluntarily offer our one special thing, the thing that really by rights ought to be most mine, and I offer that back to God. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, becomes the paradigm for olah. What is that energy? The energy of olah. It is the energy of awe. Awe is very different than love. Love is a relationship between equals. It takes two equals to be in love, each one giving to the other. Awe is not about a relationship between equals. It's where I feel myself to be virtually nothing in the presence of something so much larger than me. It's a sense of lying on the grassy knoll and looking up at the stars and feeling a sense of utter nothingness, that how could I reserve anything for myself? I'm a nothing in the face of God. You know, one of the words that appear over and over again in the Binding of Isaac story is Yud Resh Aleph. Yud Resh Aleph in the Binding of Isaac story can mean one of two things. It can either mean to see, over and over again Abraham sees things, or it can mean awe. Now let me ask you a question. Those things that you're in awe of, that you feel yourself so small in the face of, when you see them really closely, do you get to be more in awe of them or less in awe of them? So the answer is it depends what. You know, if it's like a magic trick, if it's something which is fake awe, well then you don't want to see it too closely, because if you look at it too closely, you won't be in awe of it anymore. But what if it's something that you really should be in awe of? Look at a human cell from far away, no big deal. Look at it under an electron microscope and it's the size of Manhattan, and then it's really quite a big deal. It's huge and it's so complex. Look at the universe, look at stars, look at galaxies. Look at them with a naked eye, no big deal. Look at them through the Hubble telescope. Quite a big deal indeed, then they're really awesome. You know, we can affect a kind of love of God and pretend that God is like an equal, and there is a kind of love that we can give to God, because in a certain way we are sort of kind of equal. We are human beings. We do have free will, and God is a being with free will. So there is a kind of equality between us and God, but not when you look up close. When you have that encounter of seeing, then really the only experience is awe. And that's the energy of, I'd give everything up for you. I can't say anything is my domain. And that's the energy of Ola.
Okay. So we've talked about the energy of all three of them. And I want to now talk about mitzvot. Which mitzvot have these three different types of energy? So for the final 2 minutes, let's try and talk about that. I have a table here, and we don't have sacrifices, thankfully, but we have different mitzvot. Which mitzvot would you say engender awe? The ola. What he talked about ola. Which mitzvot? So I would say days of awe. That's in the name of the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Any other ideas? Maybe prayer. Prayer, we pray and we talked about God's greatness and we feel so small. So maybe prayer. Okay, how about chatat was respect? Which mitzvot have that energy, or or you feel that their goal is to engender respect? Whether respect to God or respect to human beings. Remember the crossing of the boundaries? He talked about that. So which mitzvot sort of set up boundaries and demand that we respect those boundaries? Any ideas? Mitzvot that you can think of?
Most of the temple worship rules or mitzvot.
Okay, but not related to temple. Things that we have today. Things that we have today that have this idea of boundaries, don't cross boundaries.
How about what putting on tefillin?
Okay.
Because when the person does it, and you note I said person, you are making a statement that you're going to act in a certain way. That's a respectful way.
Yes. Okay, so I like that. And shul too. When we are in shul, we have to show respect. Certain things we can't do in shul. We can't treat the place as just a soccer field or as a coffee shop. Okay, and finally, shlamim. I think that's the easiest to think of. Mitzvot, that their purpose, their energy is creating more love in the world. What would you say are those type of?
Like having a big Shabbos lunch would be
Okay.
because you're sharing, but at the same time, it's dedicated to a higher purpose.
Very nice. So Shabbos meals together with the Kiddush and all that. Yes. Okay.
Can I come back to chatat when you're done?
Yeah. Okay. And I would say all mitzvot of gemilut chasadim, of loving kindness, whether it's charity or just we had in Purim, we had mishloach manos, we had giving to the poor. Now we have maot chitim for Pesach. Let's write that. That's relevant for now. Maot chitim. You know, we want to make sure everybody has enough provisions for the holiday. I think that's the idea of love. We want to spread, not that we love everybody, but that we care about people. We care. It's love and care. Okay, and Bill wanted to go back to respect.
Well, I'm the concept of boundaries and it brings me to Yom Kippur, where if I did something to you that was terrible, I crossed a boundary, with you. So I have to come to you and try to rectify that.
Nice. Okay.
So coming to you is like the sacrifice.
Yes.
And I apologize and I commit myself not to do it again.
With others. Very nice.
Right.
Rectifying crossing boundaries when we cross with other people. Very
Right.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think to summarize, we saw that while we don't have the sacrifices, we're not killing animals, we can still take the ideas behind these sacrifices and apply them to the different mitzvot that we have today. So thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very good.
Very good.
If you were a fundraiser, you'd say make a donation.
Very good, Charlie.
Okay. You know.